Your Majesty, where are you going? The question barely escaped the royal advisor's lips before Alpha King Adrian Blackwood stepped down from the raised platform, leaving the silver throne behind him. The moon-choosing ball had been designed around one expectation. The king would remain seated while the eligible women of the northern packs were presented before him. Instead, Adrian was walking. One measured step after another carried him across the polished marble floor of Silvercrest Hall, beneath chandeliers burning with hundreds of warm candles. Conversations vanished. Musicians lowered their instruments. Nearly 300 guests turned to follow the king's path, trying to understand which woman had finally captured the attention of the man who had rejected every political match placed before him. At the center of the hall stood Vanessa Carter, radiant in gold, her hand already beginning to rise because she believed the answer was obvious. Adrian walked past her. Vanessa's smile faltered. He passed the daughters of two powerful alphas without slowing. He passed the noble families gathered beneath the eastern balcony. And still he kept moving toward the farthest edge of the room, where someone stood almost hidden beside the tall oak doors. 12 hours earlier, Emily Carter had been sitting beside a bedroom window with Vanessa's gold dress spread across her knees, carefully repairing a loose seam that did not belong to her. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains of the Carter estate, catching the tiny needle between her fingers. "Don't make the stitches visible," Vanessa said from behind her. "The king notices details." Emily tied the thread neatly. "Then he won't notice these." Vanessa studied herself in the mirror and smiled. She was everything their family believed a future Luna should be: confident, admired, and untouched by rejection. Emily was the opposite. 1 year earlier, before her entire pack, the man fate had first connected to her had refused their bond. The rejection had become more famous than anything Emily had ever accomplished. People stopped calling her Emily when they whispered about her. They called her the rejected Omega. Tonight, she wasn't attending the moon-choosing ball as a candidate. She was going because Vanessa needed someone to carry her cloak, fix her dress, and remain invisible. Emily placed the finished gown across the bed and rose. "It's ready." Vanessa glanced at her sister's simple blue dress hanging nearby. "You're actually wearing that?" "It's the only formal dress I have." Vanessa gave a quiet laugh, then stepped close enough that Emily could smell her expensive rose perfume. "Don't misunderstand the invitation. You're not going there to be noticed." Emily met her sister's reflection in the mirror, but said nothing. Vanessa's smile sharpened. "Nobody wants you." The words should have hurt more than they did. Instead, Emily picked up Vanessa's cloak and walked toward the door with her shoulders straight. By nightfall, those same words would return beneath the chandeliers of Silvercrest Hall. Only then, Vanessa would be watching the Alpha King walk past every woman who expected to be chosen, crossing the entire hall toward the rejected Omega she had ordered everyone not to see. By late afternoon, Emily had almost convinced herself that Vanessa's words no longer mattered. Almost. The carriage rolled along the winding road toward Silvercrest Palace, its wheels humming over smooth stone while dark pine forests stretched for miles beyond the windows. Emily sat opposite Vanessa, with the folded gold cloak across her lap, watching the last daylight disappear behind the mountains. She had learned something during the year since her rejection. Pain became easier to carry when no one could see you carrying it. Her mother had stopped mentioning possible matches. Pack gatherings became exercises in avoiding sympathetic looks. Even people who had once called Emily kind began speaking to her carefully, as though rejection were something fragile and contagious. She never argued with them. She worked in the estate kitchens, helped elderly pack members with errands, and spent evenings reading beside the small window in her room. None of it was impressive enough to erase what had happened. But it belonged to her, and that mattered. "Remember," Vanessa said, adjusting a pearl pin in her hair, "you stay behind me tonight." Emily looked away from the window. "I know. If anyone asks why you're there, you're assisting me." "I know that too." Vanessa studied her, apparently disappointed by the absence of embarrassment. "You could at least try to look grateful." Most rejected Omegas would never be allowed inside a royal choosing ceremony. Emily smoothed the cloak across her knees. "Then I'm grateful." The carriage slowed. Through the glass, Silvercrest Palace appeared above the trees, its pale stone towers glowing beneath hundreds of lanterns. Carriages lined the circular drive for nearly half a mile. Wolves from influential packs across the Northern Territories climbed the broad palace steps dressed in formal gowns and dark ceremonial coats. Everyone had come for Adrian Blackwood. Stories about the Alpha King traveled farther than facts. Some said he could recognize a lie before it was spoken. Others claimed he had refused 12 alliances in 2 years because he cared more about loyalty than bloodlines. Emily suspected most stories were exaggerated. Powerful men collected legends the way palaces collected portraits. The carriage stopped. Vanessa immediately transformed, shoulders straightening as her practiced smile appeared. Emily followed her outside, carrying the cloak. Cold evening air touched her face. For one strange second, she felt relieved. Here, among hundreds of strangers, perhaps nobody would know who she was. Then a familiar voice called from the palace steps. "Emily Carter?" Her stomach tightened. Caleb Mercer, a young beta from a neighboring pack, stared at her with open surprise. His companion leaned closer and whispered something. Emily recognized the moment understanding arrived. The rejected one. She could almost hear the words without them being spoken. Vanessa noticed too. "Come along," she said brightly, as though addressing a servant. Emily lowered her eyes and followed. Inside, Silvercrest Hall seemed built to make ordinary people feel small. Marble columns rose nearly 30 feet toward a painted ceiling. Moonlight entered through towering windows while candlelight turned the polished floor silver and gold. At the far end stood the empty royal throne. Emily stopped for half a heartbeat. Something about the room felt strangely charged, as if the night were waiting for a decision nobody had made yet. "Don't stare," Vanessa whispered. "People will notice." Emily moved toward the outer wall and took her assigned place beside the tall oak doors, far from the women waiting to be presented. She expected invisibility. She welcomed it. What she did not see was the royal advisor standing on the balcony above, reviewing the arriving guests for Adrian Blackwood. His gaze passed over Vanessa Carter's name on the official list, then stopped on the woman standing behind her. "Who is that?" he asked quietly. The attendant checked the family record. "Emily Carter, sir. Her sister. A rejected Omega." The advisor looked down again. Interesting, because Emily Carter was not listed as a candidate, or even as a formal guest. She had entered Silvercrest Palace only as Vanessa's attendant. The first notes of the orchestra had barely filled Silvercrest Hall when Vanessa leaned toward Emily and whispered, "Try not to embarrass me tonight." Emily kept her hands folded around the gold cloak and watched another carriage party enter through the oak doors. "I'm standing exactly where you told me to stand." "That isn't what I mean." Vanessa smiled toward a passing noblewoman while keeping her voice low. "People already know what happened to you. I don't need them wondering why my family brought a rejected Omega to a choosing ceremony." Emily felt the old ache beneath her ribs, familiar enough now that she could breathe through it. "Then tell them the truth." "I came to help my sister." Vanessa finally looked at her. Something about Emily's calmness seemed to bother her more than tears ever had. "You still don't understand, do you? Kindness doesn't make you valuable here." Before Emily could answer, trumpets sounded from the far end of the hall. Every conversation stopped. The royal doors opened, and Adrian Blackwood entered with 4 members of his council. Emily had expected someone theatrical, perhaps even frightening after years of stories about him. Instead, the Alpha King moved with quiet certainty. He wore a black formal coat with silver embroidery at the collar, and there was nothing ornamental about his expression. He did not need to demand attention. The room simply gave it to him. Hundreds of guests bowed. Emily followed a second later, lowering her gaze as Adrian crossed toward the raised platform. When she looked up again, he was seated beneath the carved silver crest of the royal house. The presentations began. One by one, daughters of powerful families stepped forward. Adrian listened politely to names, bloodlines, accomplishments, and carefully rehearsed compliments. He offered courtesy but little else. Vanessa watched each woman return to the crowd with growing confidence. "He hasn't smiled at any of them," she murmured. "Maybe he doesn't smile often," Emily said. "He will tonight." Vanessa handed Emily the cloak without looking at her. Hold this properly. Nearly an hour passed. Emily remained beside the doors while the center of the hall glittered with people who belonged there. Then Caleb Mercer approached with 2 companions. Emily, he said, loud enough to attract nearby attention. I heard you were here, but I assumed someone was joking. Emily gave him a polite nod. Good evening, Caleb. His gaze moved toward the presentation floor. Planning to try again? A few people laughed softly. Vanessa turned, and instead of ending the conversation, she smiled. Emily knows better than that. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Vanessa stepped closer to her sister. She had her chance at fate once. Emily's fingers tightened around the cloak. More faces turned toward them. Vanessa lowered her voice, but not enough. Nobody wants you. Haven't you learned that yet? Silence gathered around Emily in small circles. She could feel curious eyes, sympathetic eyes, amused eyes. A year ago, she might have wished the marble floor would open beneath her. Tonight, she simply looked at Vanessa. Maybe being wanted isn't the same as being worthy. Vanessa's smile disappeared. Before she could answer, a sharp clatter sounded near the center aisle. An elderly Omega carrying a tray had stumbled, sending crystal glasses across the floor. Guests stepped away from her as though inconvenience were contagious. Emily immediately handed Vanessa the cloak. What are you doing? Vanessa hissed. Emily was already moving. She crossed the edge of the crowd and knelt beside the trembling woman. It's okay, she said softly. I'll help you. High above them, Adrian Blackwood had stopped listening to the nobleman speaking beside his throne. For the first time that evening, the Alpha King was no longer watching the women being presented to him. His eyes had found Emily Carter. The elderly Omega's hands shook as she reached for the scattered glasses, but Emily gently stopped her. Please let me. The woman looked up, startled by the kindness. Her silver hair had loosened from its neat bun, and embarrassment colored her face as guests watched from a comfortable distance. I should have been more careful, she whispered. Everyone dropped something eventually. Emily gathered the empty glasses one by one, checking the marble floor carefully before placing them back onto the tray. A man wearing the crest of a wealthy Eastern pack sighed impatiently. Could someone remove this mess? The presentations are being delayed. The elderly woman immediately lowered her head. My apologies, sir. Emily rose before she could answer further. It wasn't her fault. The man glanced at Emily's simple blue dress, then at the absence of any family insignia on her shoulders. And who are you? Emily hesitated only briefly. Someone who saw what happened. A guest stepped backward without looking and bumped the tray. Several nearby conversations faded. Vanessa stood 20 feet away, her expression tightening. Emily knew that look. She was supposed to disappear, not challenge someone important. Emily, Vanessa called softly, warning hidden beneath the sweetness. Emily ignored it long enough to return the tray to the elderly Omega. Are you all right? Yes. The woman studied her with unexpectedly bright gray eyes. Thank you, child. Emily smiled. You don't have to thank me. From the raised platform, Adrian Blackwood had heard every word. His advisor leaned closer with a document containing the next candidate's information, but Adrian did not take it. Emily Carter, he said quietly. The advisor followed his gaze. The rejected Omega? Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. Why does everyone keep calling her that instead of her name? The advisor seemed caught off guard. It is customary to acknowledge bond status during formal gatherings. Customary, Adrian repeated, as though testing whether the word deserved respect. Below them, Vanessa had reached Emily. She took her arm and guided her several steps away from the crowd. What were you thinking? She needed help. There are servants for that. Emily looked back toward the elderly woman. She is a servant. Vanessa exhaled sharply. Exactly. Emily's expression changed. Not anger, disappointment. Somehow, that irritated Vanessa more. Tonight is about our family's future, Vanessa whispered. Every important alpha in the Northern Territories is watching us. Then maybe we should give them something decent to watch. Vanessa stared at her. Emily gently removed her arm from her sister's grasp and returned to her place beside the oak doors. She expected the moment to disappear as quickly as it had begun. The orchestra resumed. Another candidate approached the throne. The ceremony continued. Yet something had shifted. Emily could feel it without understanding why. Across the hall, Adrian listened as Lady Rebecca Hayes described her family's alliances, but his attention kept drifting toward the doors. Emily was speaking quietly with the elderly Omega now, making sure she had recovered before returning to work. There was no performance in it. No glance toward the throne to see whether the king had noticed. That interested Adrian most. Nearly every person in Silvercrest Hall had spent the evening trying to become visible to him. Emily Carter seemed determined to remain invisible. "Your Majesty," the advisor prompted. Adrian looked at the candidate before him. "Forgive me. Continue." But a question had already settled into his mind. Why had a woman who had been publicly rejected still chosen kindness when nobody in the room could reward her for it? At the edge of the hall, Vanessa noticed where the king's eyes had gone. Her confidence vanished for one brief second. Then she turned toward Emily, and Emily saw something new in her sister's expression. Fear. Vanessa's fear lasted only a second before pride covered it. She lifted her chin, smoothed the front of her gold dress, and crossed toward Emily with the graceful smile everyone at Silvercrest Hall knew by now. "There you are," she said brightly. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten why you came." Emily glanced at the cloak folded over a nearby chair. "Your cloak is safe." "That isn't what I meant." Vanessa lowered her voice. Around them, the orchestra had begun another slow piece, giving the guests permission to talk while royal attendants prepared the final presentations. "You made quite a scene." "I helped someone pick up a tray." "You contradicted an Eastern noble in front of half the court." Emily looked at her sister carefully. Would it have been better to let him blame her for something she didn't do? Vanessa's smile tightened. "This is exactly why people misunderstand you. People misunderstand me because they usually hear about me from people like you." That landed. Vanessa's eyes cooled. "Fine. Maybe they should hear the truth from me." Before Emily understood what she intended, Vanessa turned toward Caleb Mercer and the small circle of guests beside him. "Caleb, you remember what happened at Emily's bonding ceremony, don't you?" Emily went still. Caleb looked uncomfortable now. "Vanessa, that was a year ago."
"Exactly.
Long enough that we don't need to pretend it was some tragedy anymore." Several guests nearby began listening. Vanessa continued with practiced lightness. Her fated match rejected her before the entire pack. He said the bond felt wrong. Emily accepted, and that was the end of it. The words traveled farther than Vanessa needed them to. Faces turned. Whispers followed. Rejected. The label moved through the crowd faster than Emily's name ever had. She felt heat rise into her cheeks, but she refused to lower her head. "Is that really necessary?"
Caleb asked.
Vanessa shrugged. "I'm protecting her from false hope. Tonight is a choosing ceremony, after all." Emily looked toward the throne before she could stop herself. Adrian Blackwood was watching. Their eyes met across nearly 80 feet of marble. Emily's stomach dropped. Of all the people she had hoped would never hear that story, the Alpha King had just heard enough to understand. Adrian said nothing. His face remained unreadable. Emily mistook his silence for judgment. She turned away first. "Congratulations," she whispered to Vanessa. "Now everyone knows." Vanessa leaned closer. "Maybe now you'll remember your place." Emily swallowed the ache in her throat. "I know my place." "Do you?" "Yes." Emily met her sister's eyes. "It just isn't beneath you." Vanessa had no answer. A royal herald stepped onto the platform before their argument could continue. The final candidates will now be presented. Excitement swept through the hall. Vanessa immediately forgot Emily and hurried toward the gathering line. Emily returned to the oak doors, grateful for the distance. She did not see Adrian lean toward his advisor. "Who rejected her?" he asked. "Daniel Cross, son of the former Westbrook Beta," the advisor replied after checking the record. "The bond was formally dissolved last year." "And her family allowed that story to follow her everywhere?" "Apparently." Adrian's gaze returned to Emily. She stood alone while whispers moved around her, yet her shoulders remained straight. Something in his expression softened. "She thinks I'm judging her," he said. The advisor looked surprised. Are you? Adrian watched Emily help the elderly Omega carry an empty tray toward the service corridor before quietly returning to her forgotten corner.
No.
The herald called Vanessa Carter's name. Applause rose. Vanessa stepped into the center of the hall, glowing beneath the chandeliers, certain the night had finally become hers. Adrian rose from his throne. Vanessa smiled. Emily looked down. And for the first time, the Alpha King understood exactly where he intended to go. The applause surrounding Vanessa seemed to confirm everything she had believed since entering Silvercrest Palace. She stood beneath the central chandelier, gold fabric catching the candlelight, while the royal herald finished announcing the Carter family's lineage. Emily remained beside the oak doors, nearly 80 feet away, wishing only for the ceremony to end. She had already endured enough attention for one night. Lady Vanessa Carter, the herald declared, daughter of the Carter line of Pine Ridge, presented for His Majesty's consideration. Vanessa lowered herself into a graceful curtsy. Adrian Blackwood stood before the silver throne. A murmur moved through the guests. He had remained seated for nearly every presentation that evening. Vanessa noticed.
So did Emily.
Vanessa slowly raised her eyes, and triumph brightened her face. For years, their family had prepared her for moments exactly like this. She knew how to enter a room, how to speak to powerful people, how to make confidence appear effortless. Now the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories had risen during her presentation. Vanessa extended one hand. Your Majesty. Adrian descended the first step of the platform, then the second. Excited whispers spread across Silvercrest Hall. Caleb Mercer leaned toward his companion. Looks like the choice has been made. Emily heard him and quietly looked away. Perhaps that was best. Vanessa would become Luna. The Carter family would have everything they wanted, and Emily could return home to the peaceful life she had slowly built from the pieces of her rejection. She told herself she felt relieved. Yet something about Adrian's expression troubled her. He wasn't looking at Vanessa. Not exactly. His gaze seemed fixed beyond her. Vanessa took a small step forward, believing he intended to meet her halfway. Adrian reached the marble floor. The orchestra fell silent without being instructed. Even the musicians sensed that something unusual was happening. Vanessa's mother, seated among the Carter relatives, pressed both hands together in excitement. He chose her, someone whispered. Vanessa heard it and smiled wider. Adrian continued forward. 10 feet separated them. Then 6. Then 3. Emily finally looked up. The king's face was calm, but there was a certainty in his movements that made the enormous hall feel strangely small. Vanessa lifted her hand higher. Adrian reached her. And did not stop. He walked past her. Vanessa remained frozen. With her hand suspended in the air, a collective breath moved through the room. Adrian passed the Carter family. He passed Caleb Mercer. He passed the line of noble candidates who had spent months preparing for this night. One by one, people turned to follow him. Emily's heartbeat quickened. She glanced behind herself toward the oak doors, wondering whether someone important had entered unnoticed. No one stood there. She moved slightly aside, assuming the king intended to leave the hall. Adrian adjusted his direction. Toward her. Emily's breath caught. That was impossible. Vanessa turned slowly, disbelief replacing every trace of confidence. Your Majesty, she called. Adrian did not answer. 20 feet remained between him and Emily. Then 15. Emily could suddenly hear every foolish thing people had said about her that evening. Rejected. Unwanted. Invisible. She remembered Vanessa's warning in the carriage. Stay behind me. She remembered the humiliation of her broken bond a year earlier. She remembered believing Adrian's silence meant judgment. Yet now the Alpha King was crossing Silvercrest Hall while hundreds of people watched, and there was no uncertainty left about his destination. His advisor understood first. The elderly Omega Emily had helped cover her mouth in astonishment. Vanessa's face went pale. Emily remained beside the doors, unable to move as Adrian closed the final distance. 5 feet.
3.
Then he stopped directly before her. He looked at Emily Carter as though she were the only person in the hall he had intended to find. Adrian said nothing for several seconds. He simply stood before Emily while the silence of Silvercrest Hall gathered around them. Up close, he seemed different from the distant figure she had watched from beside the doors. Less like the legend people whispered about, and more like a man who had spent an entire evening studying a room full of carefully rehearsed faces. Emily remembered herself and lowered her head. "Your Majesty, look at me." His voice was quiet, not commanding, yet she obeyed. His gray eyes held hers. Behind him, Vanessa still stood beneath the chandelier, surrounded by the stunned candidates Adrian had crossed the hall to pass. "Do you believe what your sister said?" he asked. Emily's breath caught. Of all the questions she had imagined, that was not one of them.
"I'm sorry."
"She said something to you earlier." Adrian's gaze remained steady. "I heard enough." Heat rose into Emily's face. She could feel hundreds of people waiting for her answer. Vanessa finally stepped forward. "Your Majesty, it was a private family matter. Emily has had a difficult year, and I was only trying to protect her from another disappointment." Adrian turned his head slightly. "I asked Emily." Vanessa stopped. Emily looked at her sister, then at Caleb, then at the nobles who had whispered about her rejection, as if one broken bond had become the definition of her entire life. For years she had tried to become smaller whenever people judged her. Tonight, she was tired of shrinking. "No," Emily said. Adrian's attention sharpened.
"No."
"I don't believe her." The words came more easily now. "I used to." A faint murmur moved through the crowd. Emily continued before courage could leave her. "When Daniel rejected our bond, I thought it meant there was something wrong with me. Everyone treated me differently afterward, so I assumed they must know something I didn't." Her fingers trembled, but she kept them at her sides. "Then I realized being chosen can't be the measure of a person's worth. If nobody chooses me tonight, I'll still be the same person tomorrow morning. Pain doesn't get to name me forever. I'm tired of apologizing for taking up space." Adrian glanced toward the elderly Omega standing near the service corridor. The same person who stopped to help someone when everyone else stepped away. Emily followed his gaze. Anyone should have done that, but they didn't. The simplicity of his answer silenced her. Vanessa's expression tightened. "Your Majesty, surely you didn't leave the throne because Emily picked up a few glasses." Adrian looked back at her.
"No."
For an instant, hope returned to Vanessa's face. Then Adrian continued. "I crossed this hall because your sister showed me more about her character in 5 minutes than most people here managed to show me all evening." His gaze returned fully to Emily. "That is the woman I crossed this hall to meet." Emily stared at him. This was not pity. Somehow that frightened her more, because pity she understood. Respect was unfamiliar. Adrian extended his hand, palm upward, leaving several inches between them, so the choice remained hers. "Emily Carter, you've spent enough of tonight standing beside a door because someone told you that was where you belonged." Her eyes dropped to his offered hand. "What happens if I take it?" "You stand beside me."
"No promise."
No command. No declaration of fate. Just a choice. Emily slowly lifted her hand. Across the room, Vanessa whispered her name, but Emily did not look back. Her fingertips touched Adrian's palm. Warmth flashed beneath her skin, gentle but unmistakable, and both of them froze. Adrian's calm expression finally broke. Beneath Emily's sleeve, a pale silver mark she had carried since childhood began to glow. The silver light beneath Emily's sleeve was faint at first, no brighter than moonlight slipping beneath a closed door. Then it spread across the small mark on her wrist, tracing delicate lines that had been there for as long as she could remember. Emily pulled in a startled breath and instinctively tried to withdraw her hand, but Adrian released her immediately, giving her the space to choose. The glow remained. "What is that?" Vanessa whispered. Emily stared at her wrist. "I don't know." That was only partly true. She knew the mark. Her mother had once called it a harmless birthmark, an unusual crescent crossed by 3 thin silver lines. It had never glowed before, never warmed beneath her skin. Across from her, Adrian looked equally stunned. That frightened Emily more than anything else. Alpha Kings were supposed to know the ancient signs of their world. "Your Majesty," his advisor said from several feet away. Adrian raised one hand, asking him to wait. His eyes remained on Emily. Did you know this would happen? She asked.
No.
The answer came without hesitation. Emily searched his expression for deception and found none. Then why did you come to me? Behind Adrian, the entire hall seemed to lean closer. This was the question. Everyone wanted answered. Vanessa, most of all. Adrian glanced across the 80 feet of marble he had crossed, toward the throne waiting beneath the royal crest. Because I watched this room all evening. He looked back at Emily. I watched people perform kindness when they thought I could see them. I watched families advertise their daughters as though character could be listed beside property and alliances. A few nobles shifted uncomfortably. Adrian continued calmly. Then I watched you help someone while believing I wasn't paying attention. Emily looked toward the elderly Omega. The woman's gray eyes were shining. That still doesn't explain why you walked past everyone. It does to me. Adrian's voice softened. I wanted to meet the person who wasn't trying to impress me. Vanessa stepped forward again, but she was rejected. The words sounded weaker now. Adrian turned toward her.
I'm aware.
Then you understand there must have been a reason. Emily felt the familiar sting, but before Adrian could respond, she spoke for herself. There was a reason. Vanessa blinked. Emily faced the room. Daniel didn't want the life our bond offered him. He wanted someone with status. I couldn't give him that. Her voice remained steady. He had the right to make his choice. And I survived it. Adrian's gaze settled on her with unmistakable respect. Exactly. He extended his hand again, but this time Emily understood what it represented. Not rescue.
Not ownership.
An invitation. You asked what happens if you take my hand, he said. Nothing you don't choose. Emily looked at his open palm. For the first time that evening, she was not thinking about Vanessa, Daniel, her family, or the hundreds of people watching. She was thinking about herself. She placed her hand in Adrian's. The silver mark brightened instantly. A matching light appeared beneath the cuff of Adrian's right sleeve. His advisor went completely still. The elderly Omega whispered something Emily barely heard. The twin moon seal. Adrian looked down at his own wrist, then back at Emily, astonishment replacing royal composure. Emily understood the impossible truth a heartbeat later. Whatever bond had awakened between them had not drawn Adrian across the hall. It had remained silent until they touched. He had walked to her without knowing fate would choose her too. For one suspended moment, Silvercrest Hall forgot how to breathe. Emily stared at the matching silver marks glowing on their wrists, hers delicate and familiar, Adrian's newly visible beneath the edge of his cuff. The royal advisor recovered first. The twin moon seal, he said again, louder this time. A ripple of recognition traveled through the older members of the court. Emily looked at Adrian. What does it mean? He seemed to choose his words carefully. An ordinary bond can be rejected. The twin moon seal is rarer. It stays dormant until two people choose freely before fate reveals it. Emily's gaze dropped to their joined hands. So you really didn't know?
No.
Adrian's answer was immediate. When I left that throne, I knew only what I had seen. He glanced toward the elderly Omega near the service corridor. You protected someone who could offer you nothing. Then your sister reminded this entire hall of your rejection, and you stood here without becoming cruel in return. His eyes returned to Emily. That was enough to make me cross the room. Something inside her loosened. All evening, she had feared that if Adrian chose her, people would say it was magic, instinct, or some ancient force that had made the decision for him. But the mark had appeared afterward. Fate had not dragged him toward her. He had walked willingly. Vanessa stood beneath the chandelier, her confidence gone. Emily, she said quietly. Her sister turned. Vanessa seemed suddenly younger, without the certainty she had worn all evening. I didn't know. Emily understood what she meant. Vanessa had not known about the seal. She had not known Adrian was watching. She had not known the sister she considered unwanted would become the one person the king crossed an entire hall to meet. Neither did I, Emily said. Vanessa lowered her eyes. What I said to you is cruel. Emily waited. For once, Vanessa offered no excuse. I'm sorry. Emily felt no triumph. Strange as it seemed, she did not need one. I hope someday you understand why it hurt. Vanessa nodded. Emily looked back at Adrian. What happens now? His answer came without hesitation. Whatever you choose. A glowing mark doesn't give me the right to decide your life. Something in Emily's chest eased. Adrian turned toward the musicians. One final dance. The orchestra leader lifted his violin. Emily looked at Adrian in alarm. You expect me to dance in front of all these people? A hint of amusement finally reached his face. I crossed 80 feet of marble in front of them. You can meet me halfway. Emily laughed before she could stop herself. It was small, surprised, and completely genuine. Adrian offered his hand, once more. This time she took it without hesitation. They walked together toward the center of the hall, passing the same nobles who had whispered about her only minutes earlier. No one laughed now. Yet Emily realized their silence no longer mattered either. The music began, gentle and slow. Adrian placed one hand respectfully at hers and guided her into the first turn beneath the chandeliers. Everyone is staring, she whispered. Let them. Tomorrow they'll have 100 stories about this. Most of them will be wrong. Emily smiled. And which one will be true? Adrian looked at her as moonlight poured through the tall windows and turned the silver marks on their wrists bright again. That I noticed you before destiny did. Emily's eyes stung, but she smiled through it. A year ago, rejection had convinced her that being unwanted made her lesser. Tonight, she understood what she should have known all along. Worth had never waited for another person's approval. The bond between them was not a reward that made Emily valuable. It was simply fate arriving late to a truth she had finally learned for herself. Destiny had been waiting at the end of Adrian's 80-foot walk, but choice had taken the first step. Adrian had chosen to cross the hall. Emily had chosen to take his hand. And only then had the moon answered.